Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Lake Geslani. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Senior Content Manager here at Lambda Legal, and I will be moderating today's info session. As a reminder, Lambda Legal is the nation's oldest and largest legal organization committed to protecting and advancing the civil rights of LGBTQ people and everyone living with HIV through education, public policy, and litigation. Before we hop in, wanted to acknowledge these unprecedented times that we're living through, and also note that here at Lambda Legal, we see you, we hear you, and we are here for you. Today's virtual information session is on passports for transgender, non-binary, and gender-nonconforming people. With us today are two lawyers, two Lambda Legal attorneys. We have Paul Castillo, Deputy Legal Director of Legal Education and Public Engagement, and Carl Charles, Senior Attorney. I'm going to pass it on over to Paul, who's going to give us a little rundown of today's session. Paul?
Thank you, Lake. I appreciate you. My name is Paul Castillo. I use he, him pronouns, and again, I'm Deputy Legal Director here at Lambda Legal. I want to welcome you all today to today's session, particularly because we've had an influx of questions and calls regarding today's topic. So we wanted to take a moment to do a deep dive on U.S. passports and consular reports of birth abroad, both of which are processed and issued by the United States State Department. I do need to remind this audience that this is solely an educational and informational session. It is not legal advice. We encourage everyone on this call to talk to a local attorney about your particular circumstances, and also to remind you that there is no best decision. The best decision is considering many of the factors and understanding your own family's risk tolerance, whether you prioritize traveling abroad or having an accurate identity document. It's always important to consult with a local attorney. It is equally important in today's session to acknowledge that there is a shifting landscape. The information we review today may change minutes, even hours after today's recorded session. And as such, we remind you that the actions of the President, the US State Department or other federal agencies, and the courts could shift the landscape. So it is important to keep abreast of the most current information. With that, I will turn it over to you, Lake.
Thank you, Paul. So just to outline what to expect, in today's session, we plan to review the executive level actions and U.S. State Department activity over the last 5 weeks, unpack these actions, and provide insight into what we're hearing from the community. We also plan to share a number of factors to consider as you navigate the passport application process, as well as what we might expect to see in the near future, and best practices for travel in the interim. I'm going to pass it on over to Carl now to give us a little timeline on how we even got here. Carl.
Thanks, Lake, and welcome again to everyone. Happy to be here today with Paul and Lake discussing this important information with you all. Again, my name is Carl Charles. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a senior attorney with Lambda Legal in our Southern Regional Office in Atlanta, Georgia. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, we want to start with that a passport is a crucial identity and travel document. It is, of course, required for international travel. It also, however, serves as proof of citizenship and is often presented to third parties for identification purposes. We also know that for many trans people, a passport has for a long time represented an avenue to an accurate identity document where state laws or policies prohibit updating driver's licenses or other state ID to affirm and match a person's accurate gender and identity.
So Carl, if you could maybe even get more granular, what has happened over the last 5 weeks with regards to passports?
So, as many in this audience will likely know, the new administration started its day one efforts attacking and trying to erase the existence of trans people. This all began with an executive order, which attempts, although does not succeed, in denying the existence of trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming people. To do so, it attempts to include and promulgate inaccurate, scientifically inaccurate definitions of sex, and attempts to erase references to gender throughout the federal government. Among other requirements, this day one executive order directed the State Department to implement changes to require government issued identity documents to only reflect the so-called biological binary sex of any individual possessing such a document. This, in effect, attempts to change what has been long-standing policy of the State Department in ensuring that trans people can access accurate federal identity documents. On January 21st, the day after the executive order was issued, a White House spokesperson provided to news media outlet Notice that this new policy was, as it applied to passports, would not be retroactive and would not invalidate current unexpired passports, which is to say that people in possession of passports with correct gender markers, including X gender markers, those documents remain valid. 2 days later, on January 23rd, newly confirmed Secretary of State Marco Rubio sent a very brief instruction to State Department staff, which was that those staff should suspend any application if the applicant was seeking to change their gender marker to an M, an F, or an X, and that instruction applied to all current and future passport applications. The State Department then proceeded to replace the application forms that had been in use under the Biden administration with older versions of these forms, which did not permit an applicant to select an X gender designation and does not allow a trans person to self-attest to their correct gender. A few weeks later, on February 8th, a directive was issued, an internal directive from State Department officials indicating that the adjudication of sex markers in U.S. passports and on consular reports of birth abroad should all comply with the new executive order. The CRBAs that were issued with an X marker remain valid unless and until they are amended, and passports that are unexpired and already issued with respective gender markers remain valid until replaced or expired. The other actions that the State Department has taken in subsequent days have included the erasure of any reference to trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming people from the State Department website. And the State Department has also put up a new page of instructions about specifically the sex gender marker component of passport or other federal identity documents. It's important to note that that information, again, affirms that current unexpired passports, no matter the gender marker, remain valid.
Thanks so much, Carl. Over the last 5 weeks, as all these changes have happened, I know from my own experience, I've heard from a lot of people trying to understand what this executive order means. And folks are understandably worried about their ability to travel, me included. So I wanted to turn this over to Paul to hear, to get an idea of what we are hearing directly from the community. Paul.
Absolutely, Lake. And there were over 1,000 requests for assistance and information that were funneled through Lambda Legal's help desk Since this administration took office, and in particular, people seeking information regarding not only passports, but identity documents writ large, uh, approximately 75% of those requests were individuals who were seeking information on passports, which prompted us to provide this session today. So as we go through the various scenarios, we took from those 1,000 requests, and we are going to review many of the most common questions that we heard from community. And these fall into a broad number of categories, but some of the categories we'll be reviewing today is to talk about those, what this executive order and what the directive means for those individuals with existing unexpired passports, whether those particular passports are fully or partially corrected. We'll talk about those individuals who had suspended applications and what we're seeing with regard to the State Department's implementation since the directive. We'll also talk about those individuals who have impending renewals or soon to expire passports. We've also heard from many individuals who have never had a passport application, whether now is the time to seek a US passport. And we also have heard concerns from the community about what this means with respect to state documents and inconsistent identity documents. So those are some of the categories of questions that we received. For folks in all of these categories, the urgency for answers often depended and were quite acute when folks had imminent plans for travel, or they had scheduled appointments with State Department officials who are processing the passport applications, including whether or not to keep those appointments. So we will hope to answer many of these questions with respect to some insights of what we know, what we've learned, and what we anticipate may be coming in the next few weeks. Blake.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that. Now we turn our attention to the first category up, and that's the category of unexpired passports, fully or partially corrected. Paul?
Yeah, so as Carl mentioned several times, you know, the White House has made a statement. The State Department has also posted on their website that fully or partially corrected passports remain valid. Those passports can be used for international travel. The actual directive and application of the executive order only applies to those individuals who seek a first-time U.S. passport or seek to renew their passport in the future, or make some other change to an existing passport. For those of you who have X marker on their passport in particular, particularly adults, a full validity passport is good for 10 years. And given the fact that Dana Zim, who acquired the first United States passport in 2021, which was then provided to everybody in 2022, you're talking about a passport that is valid until, at least for many of these individuals with the full validity passport, until the year 2031. You can travel on those passports, and the one consideration that people are asking about is if they have an existing passport, whether it displays an X marker or a binary marker, but it is indeed accurately reflecting one's identity. And then you have a subsequent change, for example, in name. You can still travel on that passport. And the recommendation is to carry that passport along with the court order, marriage certificate, or other official document during travel. Most folks should be traveling with the information on their passport, and also understand those of you who've already had a corrected passport. Most countries require at least 6 months remaining on the passport before they require renewal. So those individuals who are within 6 months to say a year are thinking about, their when is it a good time to update or renew their passport. Again, we cannot emphasize enough, there should be no disruption with those unexpired passports with regard to TSA or Custom and Border Protection. But we also encourage this audience to contact Lambda Legal if for some reason TSA, Custom and Border Protection, or other federal officials during the course of use and of that passport attempts or does in fact confiscate that. But again, we have no confirmed reports that is indeed the case. So Lake.
Thank you so much for diving deep into that, Paul. I'm going to turn my attention now to Carl, who's going to speak on those with suspended applications.
Thanks, Lake. And so the next category of folks that we've heard from and that we know are experiencing interaction with the new passport policy are people whose applications were suspended. And of course, that includes a number of different kinds of people who were first-time passport applicants, and people who were seeking renewals, or people who were looking to do some kind of update on their passport, whether that was a name update or a gender marker update. So the latest information we have following the internal guidance released by the State Department or provided by an employee of the State Department and then reported on last week is that passport adjudications, which is the processing of passports, is to resume in accordance with this new directive. So we have already begun hearing from community members, from TGNC and non-binary people who are receiving passports with gender markers that are inaccurate. So those gender markers have been changed without people's consent or without them asking for that to happen, but within accordance of this new directive. So folks should expect that if their passport application was in that category of suspended applications, they will start hearing from the State Department and are likely to start receiving passports or consular reports from birth abroad with inaccurate gender markers.
The other thing that folks might want to keep in mind is when you receive your passport, it will be sent to you in a package that's just the passport only. The U.S. State Department will subsequently, in a separate mailing, return the identity documents or citizenship evidence that you provided during the application process in a different mailing. And I know there was some confusion and people were asking questions about opening the package and having received only the passport only. And even before this directive, it was common practice for the State Department to issue the passport and the underlying documents in separate mailings.
Thank you both for that. The next category to discuss is renewals and passports that are going to expire soon. So, Carl, if you can talk a little bit more about those.
Thanks, Lake. So the next category that we're discussing are people who have renewals that will need to be submitted in short order, and passports that are soon to expire. As Paul mentioned, some countries require that you have a 6-month validity on your passport beyond the time that you'll be visiting that country. You'll want to check that country's specific requirements as to that. There are many that fall into that category, but you'll want to make sure that you have the best and most accurate information about the place you are visiting. So in response to concerns about people who have not yet submitted an application but will need to do so in the near future for a renewal of a soon to expire passport, we want to briefly discuss a development that occurred around the same time as the State Department's directive about how to process the suspended applications. So folks may know that on February 7th, the ACLU filed a lawsuit challenging the passport policy. In this lawsuit, they represent 7 individuals, some of whom have suspended applications, and some trans people who already received an inaccurate gender marker on their passport because they had an application that was processed. The lawsuit also is a class lawsuit, which is alleging that there is harm to different classes of people and that there are many people included in those 2 classes. The first class is people seeking to obtain a gender marker update that would be to an M or to an F. And then the second class of people are those who are seeking an X gender marker. Now, the ACLU's lawsuit is seeking relief eventually on behalf of all the people who fall into that class. The litigation, of course, will take some time, but folks will note that a few days ago, the ACLU filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, which means they filed a request to the district court in Massachusetts where their lawsuit was filed, asking the court to put on hold the passport policy and revert back to the policy that was in place under the Biden administration. Now, we don't know how the court will rule on that motion, and a few important things to note about the timeline and procedure related to that motion. So first, the Trump administration gets a chance to respond to that motion. And then the ACLU gets a chance to respond to that motion. And then finally, the court will have an oral argument where the parties will argue whether or not the court should enjoin or stop the passport policy from being in effect. Now, afterwards, the court will make a decision, and the judge they are before can decide this injunction may apply just to the named plaintiffs, that is just the 7 individuals mentioned in the ACLU's complaint, or the judge may say this injunction, the pause on this policy applies to the entire country, to everyone in the United States who is seeking a passport and has been harmed by this policy. The judge may revert to the policy under the Biden administration. But it's important to underscore that we don't yet know how that court will rule. So it's worth considering thinking about what may unfold in the next 4 to 6 weeks in the ACLU's litigation. If it is the case that the judge enters an injunction and stops this passport policy from being in effect, that may be the time when people with upcoming renewals or soon to expire passports want to submit a passport application, because there may be a window that they can get a document with a correct gender marker. So we want folks to consider that. You'll want to pay attention to what is happening related to that case as you contemplate when might be the time to submit your application. Now, it could also be the case that the judge does not issue a nationwide injunction. That is, the judge issues a pause on the passport policy only for the people named in the ACLU's lawsuit. If that happens, then the passport policy will stay in effect for everyone else who is not a named plaintiff in the ACLU's litigation. And so you may consider several factors when you are thinking about when to submit your renewal application to renew your soon to expire passport. You might want to think about the things that Paul has already discussed, which is how imminently are you traveling? Do you need to travel for business or to take care of a family member in the next 3 to 5 months? And does your passport expire quickly in the next 6 months? You don't want to wait too long for your passport to expire if you have imminent travel that you need to conduct. It is also worth considering on a person-by-person basis the importance to you about the gender marker on your passport. Maybe for you, it's more important that you'll be able to travel and you'll deal with any perceived or potential difficulties of a mismatched gender marker because it's more important to you to travel. Or perhaps you are a person for whom it is important to have a correct gender marker. So you want to wait and see what might happen in order for you to pursue that route. And you're willing to postpone upcoming travel or to hold off on travel to see what happens with any legal challenges related to this policy.
Thank you so much, Carl, for all those really important considerations. So far, we've heard about unexpired passports, suspended applications, and renewals, soon to expire passports. Kind of want to now turn our attention to first-time passport applicants. Carl, back to you.
So for people who are in this category of concern, these folks have never had a record of applying for a passport. And so unlike people with renewal applications or people who have had passports in the past, the State Department cannot look back and see a record of you ever having had a different gender marker on your passport. And so it may be possible, depending on the constellation of your other identity documents, for you to obtain a passport that reflects the correct gender marker. For example, this could be the case if you have updated your gender marker and name on your birth certificate in the state in which you were born. And if your driver's license or other IDs correctly reflect your gender and your updated name, right? You have a court-ordered name change, you have a gender marker that reflects your identity correctly in other documents, you may be able to submit and receive as a first-time applicant a passport with a correct gender marker. Now, we don't know for certain that will be the case, but you'll want to think about all the other identity documents that you need to submit to the State Department Passport Official Office where you will be working to acquire your first passport.
In this particular situation, I think it's important to emphasize that there is still risk that the State Department will look at the identity documents that are provided or the citizenship evidence and determine that they just can't tell and request additional information. For example, if the issuance date of a particular birth certificate is, in the last couple of years, they may want some additional evidence that goes back a little bit further. So they might be probing a little bit further. And so there is no guarantee. And as sort of Carl has been saying, with respect to the other categories of information, if in fact there's not imminent travel, you may want to weigh for yourself whether you want to take a look at what is going on with the litigation. If it is not urgent for you to travel, you may want to consider waiting and not acquiring a passport. But again, this is all a personal decision where you will need to weigh the various circumstances and make decisions about what best works for your particular situation.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's particularly important to note. And it's important also to note that we encourage folks to fill out their passport applications accurately. And that the directive from the State Department directs passport officials and others who adjudicate passport applications to look at underlying documents that are closest in time to the applicant's birth. That's stated very explicitly. So that contemplates exactly the situation that Paul mentions, where if there's some discrepancy in documents or the passport officials are being are exercising a really significant degree of scrutiny, they may request additional information that might allow them to essentially profile people as transgender and then refuse to issue them correct gender markers on their passport.
Thanks so much, Paul and Carl. Wanted to turn next to just some general concerns regarding inconsistent identity documents. I know for myself, not all of my documents are the same, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are in the same situation. So, Paul, what do you have to say to those folks?
Yeah, so I think right out of the gate, it's important to know that the executive order and the directives have been challenged as unlawful and unconstitutional. And so that's why you see challenges and certainly the potential for additional legal challenges. But what an executive order cannot do is it cannot direct state officials about how to handle their state documents. So when you're talking about state identification documents or other state forms of identification, such as birth certificates or driver's licenses, those documents are not affected by the executive order. Trans and non-binary people have had to make choices about what is best for themselves in terms of the gender marker that is on their various identity documents and their own sort of navigating the world with respect to the very real risk that mismatching of identification documents can put an individual in some difficult situations and often harmful situations for many. But this, again, is a personal decision. We encourage individuals who are considering whether or not an update to correct state identity documents is right for them to contact an attorney in your jurisdiction to talk through those. We understand that both state and federal documents work in tandem, and this particular executive order and directive by the State Department puts people, particularly those who were able to access all other identity documents that correctly reflected them, in a situation that causes the mismatch. So again, that is a determination that is left with the individual with respect to the comfort and how they're using those particular documents. And they would be well advised to talk to a local attorney about their situation.
Thanks so much, Paul. We covered some of the sort of the top 5 categories of questions and concerns that we've received and heard from the community. Also now adding some other questions that have also lingering on people's minds. So I think the first question has to do with preparing for travel. Going to send that on over to Carl to talk about that.
Thanks, Lake. So things that trans, non-binary, and gender nonconforming people should consider when preparing to travel are a number of different considerations. First, as we have discussed today, never a bad idea to bring supporting identity documents with you when you travel, right? Especially if you have a constellation of different names or gender markers on various documents. Bring a backup. Bring a copy of your name change order. Bring a copy of your corrected birth certificate. Have those things on hand. It's important to say that, underneath our conversation today is the reality that trans people have been dealing with discrimination in travel, both domestic and international, for many years, right? Trans people have been appropriately calling for accountability from the TSA, from the Department of Homeland Security, from Customs and Border Patrol about how they profile and discriminate against trans people for traveling while trans. And so discrimination against trans travelers did not start on January 20th of this year. And we don't say that to suggest that people's concerns are not valid, are not completely reasonable, but we say that to remind people that there are strategies that you can employ to protect yourself as you are traveling and to get support from other people as you are navigating these circumstances. So first and foremost, we recommend creating a travel safety plan. Whether you're traveling domestically or internationally, this is never a bad idea. This plan could include the following things: providing your itinerary, including flights, layovers, departure and arrival destinations to a trusted friend or family member. It's also never a bad idea to provide this information to more than one person. In the event that you can't reach a friend or a family member, having a backup is a great idea. That way there's more than one person you can be in touch with who knows the dates that you're traveling, where you're traveling to, how long your layover is in a given place, and then when you'll finally reach your destination. It's also a good idea to let those friends or family members know where you'll be staying as you are traveling. Are you going to have a rental car? Are you going to be using public transit? Will you be staying at a hotel or an Airbnb or a hostel? Or will you be staying with friends or people in the area that you know? Providing local contact information for your lodging destination is also an important safety measure that you can take. In this particular instance where the policy has changed, and we are hearing that trans people both are concerned and are feeling rightfully so that they are being deliberately put in harm's way, we recommend going a step further in your safety plan. Consider texting a friend or family member or communicating in some other way when you've successfully passed through a security checkpoint. Let someone know that you made it through without issue, that you're walking to your gate, or that you're on your way there, so that they know to check in with you after or before you're going through that situation and you're being called upon to present identity documents. These can be strategies to both help you feel supported and make sure that folks know what is going on with you as you are traveling, either domestically in the United States or even internationally. Finally, we'll say, have a way that folks can reach you, especially if you are traveling abroad. Have an email address, a local phone number, international cell service where you can, or acquire a local SIM card, or have your point of reference be the hotel or place that you're staying, which has some method of communication, so that people in your community of care, in your family and friend circle, can reach you and know how to find you as you are traveling.
The other thing, too, if you are financially able to do so, we would recommend booking travel that is fully refundable, which gives you flexibility to make last-minute changes and make decisions as the landscape is shifting on a last-minute basis, and still be able to secure a refund if it is possible. These are all methods that Carl described that have been employed, and things that we're hearing that folks are doing in order to make preparations. It's also a good idea, again, to keep tabs on the current information on where things are at. Lambda Legal has refreshed our document many times over with respect to identity documents for trans and non-binary people, because the landscape keeps changing. So prior to travel, make sure that you're up on the latest of what is going on. And Lambda Legal is one place that you can go to find current information.
Staying on this topic of travel, I know there's some extra context perhaps with regards to people who are traveling domestically and using perhaps state IDs. So Paul, if you could kind of expand on that.
Right. So folks that have various identity documents can make choices about the identity document that they're using for particular modes of travel. For international travel, a passport book or card is required depending on your destination. But for domestic travel in particular, you can make choices about the identity document that you're using, provided that it is a real ID. And I know many states throughout the last several years have been preparing their driver's license or state ID to be real ID compliant. And in states, particularly where you remain available to correct those identity documents, you need not use an inaccurate passport, for example, and instead choose to use your real ID as a state document. Again, when you have multiple identification documents and you are traveling domestically, you do indeed have choices of which to present with regard to travel.
Thank you, Paul. I know that we want to talk a little bit about special considerations for U.S. citizens that are abroad. I'm going to turn that over back to you, Carl, to talk a little bit more about those folks.
Thanks, Lake. So for U.S. citizens who are living abroad, your passport is a document that you are going to need to utilize far more often than citizens here in the United States. And as a result, it's important that you consider and pay special attention to the expiration date of your current passport. We also think that you should consider that you are less able to wait and see how things unfold because you are in need of that document on a more frequent and necessary basis than someone who is perhaps traveling for leisure or for an occasional family trip. Because you may be passing through other countries and coming back to the United States infrequently, you'll need to have an unexpired passport routinely, even if that passport does not have an accurate gender marker.
Thank you, Carl. I know another special consideration on people's minds are minors and their passports and their IDs. So, Paul, turn it to you.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge the many questions by parents who are helping their trans or non-binary minor kind of navigate the attacks that are occurring in education and with respect to access to healthcare. And now added to this is considerations about what sort of identity documents that you should be thinking about securing for your loved one who is a minor. With respect to passports, people who are 16 and under may have more frequent points at which they need to update a particular passport. With that said, I think that a lot of the recommendations that we went through today are similar with respect to families trying to navigate this, with respect to, is there an urgent need to travel? Are you paying attention to the litigation? Is there an opportunity during the course of various court cases that would stop this discriminatory policy? Or is your family in a situation where you're waiting and seeing? With respect to state identification documents, I think this is another place where I would encourage folks to talk to local attorneys about what the landscape looks like in your state, which may help inform and or provide additional factors that you might want to consider with respect to your minor. And it may very well depend on your own comfort or the age of the minor. But again, the best decision is a decision that is informed, that is individualized. And if you are able to consult with an attorney, that you take advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you, Paul. We've heard a lot about the harmful impact of these directives. Wanted to pose to you, Carl, what are we seeing in terms of maybe potential responses to the passport and federal ID policies?
Thanks, Lake. So this just happened a few days ago. So I want to amplify for our audience that although it was done somewhat out of order, the Department of State has published a notice requesting public comments on their proposed changes to several of the passport application and renewal forms. That includes the DS-11, the DS-82, and the DS-5504, I believe. We're going to provide a link in the show notes for audience members to go and submit a comment. It's a very short period of time, but this is a concrete action that people can take immediately and individually to say to the government, this policy is wrong, it is dangerous, it is unjust, and it is discriminatory. You can, be as specific as you want to be with your comment. You can take into consideration whether you include your name and other data about you individually as your risk tolerance dictates. But it is incredibly important that we have an outpouring of opposition in these public comments. The State Department is required to review every unique comment that it receives. So the more unique comments detailing the problems with this policy, the better. So please take a look at that link that we will provide in the notes from today's webinar. I also want to amplify for people that we here at Lambda Legal are contemplating, we are exploring other potential avenues to challenge the passport policy. We may have similar challenges to the ACLU's lawsuit if we decide to go that route. But in particular, we are interested in hearing from people, any trans person, non-binary person, intersex person, or gender non-conforming person who experiences any issue whatsoever with an unexpired passport for domestic or international travel. We want to hear from you as quickly as possible. We would also like to hear from people who are currently seeking only a name change on their passport or on their consular report of a birth abroad, and instead have had their gender marker non-consensually changed, despite the fact that they were only seeking a name change update. If there's some other kind of clerical irregularity that you were seeking to adjust on your passport, such as an incorrect birth date, a misspelling of your name, or some other issue, and in requesting that change, instead you got a non-consensual gender marker change, we would like to hear from you. We would also like to hear from any intersex person who is seeking an X gender marker on their passport. You can contact us about these experiences and irregularities at our help desk. We will have a link in our presentation as well as in the show notes for people to reach out to us.
Great, and right here on the screen, you can see both the URL for our help desk as well as the landing page will bring you. So, please don't hesitate to write in and let us know of your experiences, as Carl mentioned. Now, as we kind of approach the end of our info session, I know that there's been a lot of information thrown your way, but we wanted to kind of leave you with some main key takeaways. So I'm going to have Carl here give us that rundown.
Thank you, Lake. Thank you again to everyone who took time out of your day to join us here. Thank you especially to Paul for his leadership and work on this issue, and to Lake for facilitating our conversation today. We want to remind people of a few key takeaways before we close out. First of all, we recommend people consider a cautious approach. Wait to see how the directive is implemented and how the policy is carried out, as well as for developments in the ACLU's litigation and how that may impact whether the passport policy remains in effect nationwide. Please consider seriously having a travel safety plan, even if you are traveling domestically, even if you are traveling not by plane. It's never a bad idea to enlist the support and communication awareness of your friends and family members. It is an especially challenging time to be a trans person in the United States, and taking care of one another and supporting one another is an incredibly important thing that we can do. And we strongly recommend people create networks of support and communication, especially now. I want to underscore again what we shared at the beginning. This session is solely for educational and informational purposes only. We are not providing legal advice here, and it is critically important that you speak with someone who is licensed in your jurisdiction, or go to a gender marker legal help clinic in your area. As my colleague Paul has said, there's no right answer to many of these questions. There is just the best answer for you as an individual, considering your personal circumstances and your risk tolerance and how things are changing in a sometimes very, very quick manner. So again, we underscore that there's no perfect decision. There's no necessarily right decision. There's the decision that's best for you. Please, as you are contemplating all of these things and trying to stay up to date with the latest information, visit Lambda Legal's resource, Identity Documents for Trans and Non-Binary People. As Paul mentioned earlier on in our session, we have updated that document several times already, and we will continue to do so with the most up-to-date information as we learn it and can verify it. We are staying connected to trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming community members across the country. Hearing from and talking to you all has helped us understand the landscape and be better positioned to support other people. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Carl. Wanted to thank again both of you for being here, and those of you who are watching at home, thank you for tuning in. Yeah,